My name isn't important to the story, but what happened on those Sundays slowly changed the way I understood family. At first, I didn't notice the pattern. It seemed small enough to ignore. One Sunday afternoon, my sister-in-law casually mentioned she was preparing dinner. The next week, someone referred to the roast from last Sunday. A few days later, photos appeared in the family group chat. A long table, candles, plates of food, my husband's cousins laughing in the background. We weren't there. The first time it happened, I assumed we had simply missed the invitation. The second time, it felt strange. By the third or fourth Sunday, the pattern was impossible to ignore. When my husband asked his sister about it one evening, she smiled with that gentle apologetic tone people use when they think the explanation should be obvious. "Sorry," she said lightly. "It's just for close family." The phrase landed in the room like something fragile that no one wanted to touch. My husband simply nodded. He didn't argue. He rarely argued with his sister. Their relationship had always been quiet and careful, like two people walking around invisible furniture. But something about the explanation didn't make sense. Because close family seemed to include a surprising number of people. Cousins we barely knew. A neighbor from her street. Once even a co-worker she had recently met. But somehow, never us. The strange rhythm of it all slowly became part of our Sundays. Round mid-afternoon, someone in the group chat would mention dinner preparations. Later that evening, more photos would appear. Wine glasses. Bowls of food. Everyone gathered around her large dining table. And every week my husband and I would look at the pictures for a moment, then quietly put our phones down. Our Sundays became very quiet after that. At first we stayed inside the house, pretending the pattern didn't bother us. We ate dinner later than usual, watched television, and tried not to check the group chat. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was just slightly heavy. One Sunday evening, my husband carried two plates outside instead of setting them on the kitchen table. It wasn't meant to be symbolic. The weather was warm, and the house felt stuffy. We sat near the small patch of garden behind our house. The garden wasn't impressive. A few herbs. Some tomato plants that never seemed to grow properly. A narrow wooden fence separating our yard from the neighbors. But that night the air outside made everything feel different. We talked more easily. About work. About the tomatoes. About the neighbor's dog that barked at every passing car. Nothing important. But somehow it felt better than sitting inside. The following Sunday, we did the same thing. Then again the week after that. Slowly, without planning it, the garden dinners became our habit. Instead of thinking about the invitations we never received, we started planning small meals we could enjoy outside. Sometimes we grilled vegetables. Sometimes we reheated leftovers. Sometimes we ordered takeout and ate directly from the paper containers. It wasn't meant to become anything special. It was just dinner outside. But something small began to change. One evening our neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, passed by while walking her dog. She paused near the fence when she saw the table. "That looks nicer than eating inside," she said with a laugh. We invited her to sit for a few minutes. She stayed only 10 minutes that first time. But the next Sunday she came back carrying a small loaf of bread she had baked that afternoon. A few weeks later my husband invited a coworker who lived nearby and didn't have family in town. Another Sunday Mrs. Delgado brought her daughter. The dinners remained small and unstructured. People came and went whenever they wanted. Some stayed for half an hour. Others lingered much longer. Sometimes it was still just the two of us. But something had shifted. Our Sundays no longer felt like empty spaces waiting to be filled by someone else's invitation. They were ours. The garden changed too. We added string lights across the fence. My husband built a slightly larger wooden table after realizing the folding one wasn't big enough when four people showed up at the same time. Someone brought a small plant one evening. Another person brought a dessert. No one called it an event. It was simply dinner in the garden. The first time a relative wandered over happened almost by accident. My husband's cousin Aaron had come to the neighborhood for my sister-in-law's dinner and parked down the street. As he walked past our house, he noticed the warm lights in the garden and heard the sound of people laughing. He leaned over the fence. "Wait," he said with surprise. "You guys are having dinner too." We laughed and invited him in. He stayed for almost an hour. The following Sunday he stopped by again before heading to his sister's house. Then another cousin did the same. They would sit for a while, talk, sometimes eat something, and then continue on their way. Word spread quietly through the family the way small things often do. Apparently people liked the garden. It was relaxed. There was no seating chart. No expectation that you stay the entire evening. You could simply show up, or leave, or return the following week. I didn't think too much about what that meant until a few weeks later during a birthday gathering for my husband's mother. The entire family was there, including my sister-in-law. Conversations drifted between small groups the way they always did at family events. People stood near the kitchen counter, near the living room window, near the table filled with desserts. At one point my sister-in-law began describing her Sunday dinners to someone who hadn't attended before. "We keep it small," she said casually. "Just close family." The phrase floated through the room. But something was different this time. A couple of cousins exchanged quick glances. Someone mentioned the garden dinners. "Oh yeah," one of them said with a shrug. "We stopped by their place first last Sunday." Another relative nodded. "The garden is really nice." No one sounded confrontational. There was no argument. But the sentence "just close family" didn't carry the same quiet authority it once had. Because now there were other Sundays, other tables, other places where people could gather. Later that evening my sister-in-law approached me near the kitchen counter. Her voice was polite, almost curious. "I've been hearing about your backyard dinners," she said. I nodded. "They're nothing big," I told her. "Just whoever happens to come by." She studied me for a moment as if trying to understand something she hadn't expected. Then she gave a small thoughtful nod. "Well," she said slowly, "that sounds nice." That was all she said. The following Sunday our garden table had 5 chairs filled. The week after that it was just the 2 of us again. But by then I had realized something important. For months we had been waiting for someone else to include us. Waiting for an invitation. Waiting for a seat at someone else's table. But belonging, it turns out, isn't something another person can fully control. Sometimes it begins with 2 chairs in a quiet backyard. A simple meal. A few lights hanging across a fence. And whoever chooses to sit down beside you.